You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. On today's episode of the podcast, we review the first test between Australia and the West Indies from the Perth Stadium. It's the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast, and let's get started. Let's have a look at the match summary from the first test between Australia and the West Indies from the Perth Stadium. Australia batted first and made 4 for 598 declared in 152.4 overs in their first innings. Labuschagne top scored with 204, and Braithwaite took 2 wickets for the West Indies. The West Indies, in reply to Australia's first innings score, were bowled out for 283 in 98.2 overs. Braithwaite top scored with 64. Cummins and Stark took 3 wickets each for Australia. Australia, in their second innings, finished on 2 for 182 declared in 37 overs. Labuschagne top scored with 104 not out. Roach and Chase took 1 wicket each for the West Indies. The West Indies needed 498 runs to win. They were bowled out for 333 in 110.5 overs. Braithwaite top scored with 110, and Lyon took 6 wickets for Australia. Australia won by 164 runs, and Marnus Labuschagne was named Player of the Match. What were the key moments and key factors from this first test between Australia and the West Indies? The partnerships of 142 for the second wicket between Khawaja and Labuschagne, 251 for the third wicket between Smith and Labuschagne, and 196 for the fourth wicket between Smith and Head set up Australia to reach their score of 4 for 598 declared in their first innings. Australia's bowling to dismiss the West Indies for 283 in their first innings, which gave Australia a first innings lead of 315 runs. The partnerships of 81 for the second wicket between Warren and Labuschagne, and 81 unbeaten between Smith and Labuschagne for the third wicket, helped Australia set a target of 498 for the West Indies to chase in the fourth innings. Australia's bowling to dismiss the West Indies for 333 in their second innings, which guided Australia to victory by 164 runs and retain the Sir Frank Worrell Trophy. Those were the key moments and key factors from this first test at the Perth Stadium. Let's have a look at both teams' performances in this first test at the Perth Stadium with both bat and ball. We'll start with Australia and their batters. Warner, 5 and 48. Khawaja, 65 and 6. Labuschagne, 204 and 104 not out. Smith, 200 not out and 20 not out. And Head, 99. That's how the Australian batters went about things in this first test match against the West Indies at the Perth Stadium. I thought Australia's batting in this test match against the West Indies in Perth for the first test of the series was a pretty clinical batting performance. And this is what you want to see from Australia's batting in Test cricket. You want to see them scoring runs and being consistent in both innings. And that's what we saw in this test. Now, let's talk about the first innings performance with the bat. Scoring 4 for 598 declared inside 152.4 overs was a good score batting first on a really good batting surface in Perth. The partnerships of 142 for the second wicket between Khawaja and Labuschagne, 251 for the third wicket between Smith and Labuschagne, 196 for the fourth wicket between Smith and Head, all contributed to Australia reaching that 598 score in their first innings. We also saw some good contributions with the bat from Labuschagne, 204, Smith, 200 not out, Head, 99, and Khawaja, 65. The middle order didn't even need to bat. Cameron Green, Alex Carey didn't even need to go out to the middle and bat. It was pretty much Khawaja, Labuschagne, Smith, and Head who did most of the damage. And David Warner was the only one who missed out in the first innings, and probably missed out across the 2 innings in this test match. So the first innings batting was good from Australia. The second innings pretty much was good as well. Australia had a lead of 315 runs on the first innings and batted well to set a target of 498 for the West Indies to chase down. They finished on 2 for 182 declared in their second innings. Marnus Labuschagne backed up his double century scoring 104 in the second innings. Also, some good partnerships in the second innings as well from, if I can remember those partnerships, 81 for the second wicket between Warner and Labuschagne, and 81 unbeaten between Smith and Labuschagne for the third wicket in the second innings for Australia. Pretty much helped them to get that lead up to 498 runs. So the batting from Australia in the second innings was pretty good. It was pretty clinical, and it was great to see the Australian batsmen finally score runs consistently, and it was great to see that. So let's talk about some of the individual performances. Marnus Labuschagne, what a test match he had. 204 and 104 not out. He was magnificent. Looked good. He's a serious player. He became the third Australian batsman and the 8th batter to score 200 plus and 100 runs in the same test. Doug Walters and Greg Chappell are the other 2 Australians to achieve that in Test cricket. He's also the 8th batter in the game in general in the history of Test cricket to achieve that as well. Walters, Gavaskar, Rowe, Chappell, Gooch, Lara, Sangakkara, brilliant names there, all great players. For Labuschagne to join that group is a pretty good effort from him. He batted well, Marnus. His batting was good. He looked organised. He knew his role in this side. His technique's good. He faced over 350 balls in the first innings, 110 in the second innings. It's just magnificent batting. I can't add anything to that because it was just wonderful to watch. Let's talk about his best friend in the side, Steve Smith. Steve Smith, wow, what a double century. 200 not out off of 311 balls. He's back. He is back, Steve Smith. It's great to see Steve Smith batting like this. He is in the zone, and he wants to score big runs this summer against the West Indies and South Africa. He looked at his very best, Steve Smith. That's why he's averaging 60 plus in Test cricket. The technique changes that he's made has really helped his batting. Not moving as much as he did before has helped. He's just timing the ball well. He's just a brilliant batter. And to see him bat the way he did in this Test match, very ominous signs for the West Indies going into the second Test in Adelaide, and also for South Africa when they play Australia in the next Test series straight after this Test series against the West Indies. But Steve Smith, he is in serious touch. He was probably one of the best knocks he's played. 4 double centuries now, 3 of them against England, and now 1 against the West Indies. Unbelievable innings from Smith. He's batting really well. Travis Head, let's talk about him. I thought he batted magnificently, Travis Head. 99, and I felt bad for Travis Head. He chopped on for 99, nearly got a century, got out on 99. He's joined the club now, of Test batters to get out for 99. But apart from that, 99 off 95 balls is a pretty good innings from Travis Head. The situation was set up perfectly for him. Australia were miles in front of the game when he came in. That partnership he had with Smith, 196 for the 4th wicket, was superb. The way that Travis Head batted was like a one-day T20 innings. He could unleash. And this is what Travis Head can do. He can be aggressive when the game situation dictates it. And it sort of did in this first innings of the first Test against the West Indies. Came out, played his shots, got 99 off 95 balls. I thought he batted magnificently. He deserved a century, but it wasn't to be. But great signs for Travis Head going forward that his batting is really firing. Usman Khawaja, 65 he made. I thought he batted well. Missed out in the second innings, got out for 6. But Khawaja, in good touch, 65, 149 balls. Very good to see Khawaja scoring runs and looking in good touch ahead of what is a big few Test matches for Australia this summer against the West Indies and South Africa, but what's to come next year as well. Last but not least, David Warner missed out in this Test match, got 5 and 48. He'll be disappointed with that, but he'll be hoping to score some runs in the next Test in Adelaide. Australia did well with the batting in this Test match, as we said, but also did the basics well with the bat. They ran well between the wickets, rotated the strike well, building partnerships. They punished the bad balls. The top order doing their job and setting up the foundation for the rest of the batters to build on. They backed up partnerships. There's a lot of positives from the batting performance for Australia in this test match, in this first test of the series against the West Indies. Also another positive, Steve Smith, Marnus Labuschagne became the fifth pair of batters from Australia to score 200 plus scores in each innings for Australia in a test match. Obviously Smith 200 not out, Labuschagne 204. They join an exclusive group of Australian batters to achieve that. Ponsford and Bradman did it against England in 1934. Then Bradman and Barnes against England in 1946. Laurie and Simpson against the West Indies in 1965. And Ponting and Clark against India in 2012. So that's another positive from the Australian batting performance. So a bit of stats there and history there for Smith and Labuschagne. And it's not every day where you get two batters scoring two double centuries in the same innings, or let alone in the same test match. Apart from that, good signs for Australia with the bat. The top order's firing, scoring runs, looking good touch. So I think it's going to be a very big summer from the Australian batters, not only in this series against the West Indies, but also in the series against South Africa, which is to follow this series against the West Indies. So overall, it was a good batting performance from Australia in this first test against the West Indies. Let's have a look at the Australian bowlers and their performance in this first test against the West Indies here at the Perth Stadium. No wickets for Labuschagne, 2 wickets for Head, a wicket for Green, 3 wickets for Cummins, 4 wickets for Stark, 8 wickets for Lyon, and 2 wickets for Hazelwood. That's how the Australian bowlers went about things in this first test against the West Indies from the Perth Stadium. I thought the Australian bowling in this first test match against the West Indies was very good. We know that this Australian attack is high quality. Cummins, Stark, Lyon and Hazelwood, plus Cameron Green. It was a very good bowling performance from all of them. To take wickets on this Perth wicket, that was pretty good for batting, even into the last day of the test match. But they were able to stick to their plans and get wickets and bowl the West Indies out twice and get 20 wickets. So let's talk about the first innings bowling performance. They did well to bowl the West Indies out for 283 inside 98.2 overs, which gave Australia a first innings lead of 315 runs, which was a very good lead to have after Australia batted well in the first innings. The second innings bowling was pretty good as well. They bowled really well after some tough resistance from the West Indian batters. The pitch wasn't doing much, still pretty good for batting. But they stuck to their plans, the Australian bowlers, and didn't panic. Obviously, Pat Cummins didn't bowl in the second innings due to a quad injury. So the added pressure of a bowler down. So the rest of the bowlers, Stark, Lyon, Hazelwood, had to really step up in the absence of Pat Cummins. But they did that very well, and the Australian bowlers were able to get the job done and bowl the West Indies out in their second innings for 333 inside 110.5 overs. Australia's bowling across the two innings was really good. They did the basics well with the ball. They bowled good lines and lengths, applied pressure onto the West Indian batters throughout the two innings of this test match. They applied pressure as well with the ball, bowled dot balls to build pressure and maidens. They took wickets at regular intervals throughout the two innings of this test match to the West Indian batters. All the Australian bowlers did their job. It was a relentless performance from the Australian bowlers. Relentless pressure from the Australian bowlers with the ball. It felt like every wicket they were going to take a wicket with every ball. This pitch wasn't offering much in terms of swing, seam, or spin. It was holding up pretty well. And that's down to a number of factors. The weather in Perth obviously wasn't as hot as we predicted. It was a bit cool. The cracks didn't open up as much. It didn't really assist Nathan Lyon all that much with turn. Not much reverse swing or seam or swing. But the Australian bowlers found a way to take wickets. Now, this Australian attack is by far probably the best attack we've ever produced. Now, Australian cricket has many great bowling attacks, going many different generations and eras. But I think in the modern era, This attack of Cummins, Stark, Lyon and Hazelwood is by far the best attack that we've ever produced. Pat Cummins, 202 test wickets. Stark, 291. Hazelwood, 217. Lyon, 446 test wickets. 4 bowlers, each with 200 plus test wickets for the first time ever in the same playing 11. That's unheard of. And this attack has achieved that. Because Pat Cummins got his 200th wicket in this first test against the West Indies. For that achievement to be achieved. It's a brilliant attack. Everyone did their job. And the thing that I liked from Australia is they didn't panic. They didn't panic because we know Australia, they find it difficult to wrap up test matches. Look what happened last year in England, in the Ashes at the SCG, where England held on for a draw. Also the summer before that, 2020-21, where India came out. Australia couldn't finish off the job in Sydney or in Brisbane. But this Australian team, bowling in the last innings, yes, it's big pressure. You have to take wickets. And for Australia, coming into the final day of this test match, they were under pressure with the ball on a pitch that wasn't doing much. But they didn't panic. They stuck to their plans. They bowled in the right areas. They trust their process. They trust their processes, their methods. And they got the job done because this attack's pretty good. And also, it wasn't the main attack taking most of the wickets. Travis Head, the part-time off-spinner, took 2 wickets in the second innings. He was the partnership breaker. Nathan Lyon bowled superbly, for his 6 wickets. 21 5-wicket hauls in Test cricket now. Wonderful, wonderful bowler. We're very lucky to have him. He was able to get something out of the pitch, bit of turn, get the 6 wickets to bowl Australia to victory. And you expect that from your spinner on day 5 in a test match. It was just a clinical bowling performance. Nothing much to add on to it. It's just a quality bowling performance. And no doubt, this Australian attack will go down as one of the best attacks in world cricket. The only negative is Pat Cummins' injury from this test match. Didn't bowl in the second innings because he picked up a bit of a quad injury. Could be in doubt for the next test in Adelaide. But apart from that, overall, it was a good bowling performance from Australia. Overall, it was a good team performance from Australia in this first test against the West Indies. Let's have a look at the West Indies team performance with both bat and ball in this first test at the Perth Stadium. We'll start with their batters. Braithwaite, 64 and 110. Chanderpaul, 51 and 45. Bonner, 16. Blackwood, 36 and 24. Mayers, 1 and 10. Holder, 27 and 3. Brooks, 33 and 11. De Silva, 0 and 12. And Chase, 13 and 55. That's how the West Indian batters went about things in this first test at the Perth Stadium against Australia. The West Indies batting throughout this test match here in Perth was good and poor. It was a bit of a mixed performance, but the West Indies showed good resistance and good fight in the first test with the bat here at the Perth Stadium against Australia. Let's talk about the first innings. It was always going to be difficult for the West Indies batting against the Australian attack of Cummins, Stark and Hazelwood, Lyon, plus Cameron Green. They weren't going to match Australia's first innings score of 4 for 598 declared, but it was an opportunity for them to bat long and to really apply themselves in this first innings of this first test. They started well with the bat. Openers Craig Braithwaite, the skipper, and Tagnarine Chanderpaul on debut added 78 runs, for the first wicket. But after that good start, things started to go wrong for the West Indies. They lost wickets at regular intervals throughout the innings. 1 for 78, 2 for 159, 3 for 166, 4 for 209, 5 for 245, 6 for 245, 7 for 266, 8 for 282, 9 for 283, and 10 for 283. Didn't build big partnerships with the bat either. 78, 28, 53, 7, 43, 36, 0, 21, 16, 1 and 0. The batting fell away after the good start from the openers. The West Indies were bowled out for 283 inside 98.2 overs, conceding a first innings lead of 315 runs to Australia. The second innings batting was pretty good. I thought they showed pretty good fight and resilience in the second innings. Chasing 498 wasn't going to happen for the West Indies, but it was all about showing fight and resistance and resilience and hoping to blunt the Australian attack on a Perth wicket that was still pretty good for batting, even going into day 5. They started well with the bat, just like they did in the first innings. The openers again, Braithwaite and Chanderpaul, brilliant opening partnership, and I think the West Indies have found an opening partnership there. Added 116 runs for the first wicket, and were going quite well. They looked comfortable at the crease. They were untroubled. They looked like they were going to bat for a very long time, and maybe the West Indies could have drawn this match. But just like in the first innings, as soon as the opening partnership was broken, the West Indian batters managed to lose a few wickets and struggle a bit. Chanderpaul was dismissed for 45. The partnership broken between him and Braithwaite. But the West Indies managed to show some fight and resistance with the bat, but some batters couldn't cope with the pressure being applied by the Australian attack. Braithwaite was the key. After scoring his century of 110 off 188 balls, he needed to face as many balls for the West Indies to try and get them over the line and trying to save this test match. But Craig Braithwaite got dismissed for 110, bowled by Nathan Lyon. Then the rest of the West Indies batters struggled, and the West Indies was 7 for 233 inside 84.2 overs. Many people thought that this game was going to finish well before lunch on day 5, and Australia would win this match quite easily. But the partnership between Roston Chase and Azari Joseph saw the West Indies to lunch at 7 for 258 inside 90 overs, and Chase and Joseph added 82 runs for the 8th wicket, offered some more fight and resistance with the bat for the West Indies, and they batted well. Roston Chase scored 55 and Azari Joseph scored 43. It was a pretty good partnership, and they were trying to get the West Indies to tea on the last day. But once they got out, it was just a matter of time before the innings was over. The rest of the tailenders from the West Indian batting lineup pretty much got out cheaply. The Australian bowlers were able to bowl the West Indies out for 333 inside 110.5 overs. So that's the story of the West Indies batting across the 2 innings of this first test. As I said, there's some positives from the West Indian batting. We often look at the negatives, and the biggest negative for the West Indies is, yes, they didn't win this test match, but that's beside the point. The point is that the West Indian batters showed fight, resilience, and they really stuck at it. You have a look at the scorecard. Most of their batters faced over 100 balls or 50 plus balls. So that's an indication that the batters applied themselves and they showed that fight and resilience and resistance that you need as a test batter. The positives from the West Indies batting, I thought Tagnarayan Chanderpaul on debut scored 51 and 45. I think he had a pretty good test match. The son of Shivran Chanderpaul bats like his old man. Got hit a few times when he was batting in the first innings with a short ball by the Australian bowlers, but he got back up and he kept on fighting. He took on the short ball, played some pull and hook shots. He's going to be a serious player one day for the West Indies. No doubt his father will be proud of him on test debut. Craig Braithwaite, the captain, led from the front, scored a brilliant 110 in the second innings. He also scored 64 in the first innings. Brilliant leader, captain of this West Indian side, really showing how the West Indies should play in Test cricket. And he had a pretty good Test match, the skipper, in terms of the batting side of things. His captaincy in terms of on-the-field stuff was a little bit poor, but his leadership in terms of his leadership with the bat was pretty good. And also the West Indies, the biggest positives with their batting is the fight and resistance with the bat. Not many people thought that this test match was going to go into day 5, session number 2, but the West Indies were able to take it that far. The batters showed some fight and application with the bat. They faced 98.2 overs in the first innings and 110.5 overs in the second innings, which is an indication that the West Indian batters were able to bat long and apply themselves and show that fight and resistance and resilience. The opening partnership is a big positive. I think Craig Braithwaite, Tagnarayan Chanderpaul The West Indies have found an opening partnership for them in Test cricket going forward. Some of the negatives with the bat from the West Indies, I think their running between the wickets was poor. They had some poor shot selection and decision-making errors from the batters. So that's something that they need to tidy up on going into Adelaide. But apart from that, I thought it was a pretty good effort from the West Indies. Yes, they did struggle at times with the bat, but for them, it's all about trying to fight, be resilient, and try and fight for long periods of time. And they definitely showed that in this first test here in Perth. So hopefully they can do the same in Adelaide. But for them in Adelaide, the day-night test is going to be a different kettle of fish, different conditions under lights. So that will pose a new challenge to the West Indian batters. But apart from that, great resistance, great fight from the West Indian batters. I think they will take a lot of confidence from this effort in Perth heading into the next test in Adelaide. So overall, it was a good batting effort from the West Indies to show some fight and resistance in this first test against Australia. Let's have a look at the West Indies bowlers and their performance in this first test here at the Perth Stadium against Australia. 2 wickets for Braithwaite, a wicket for Mayers, no wickets for Holder, 1 wicket for Chase, no wickets for Joseph, 1 wicket for Roach, and 1 wicket for Seals. That's how the West Indian bowlers went about things in this first test against Australia. I thought the West Indies bowling in this first test match against Australia was poor. The first innings, let's talk about that, conceding 598 runs in the first innings just showed how well Australia batted, but how poorly the West Indian bowlers bowled. They bowled too short here in Perth. You got to pitch it up fuller. The Australian batters were able to leave the ball on length. Here with the extra bounce and pace in Perth, you got to pitch it up. You can't bowl short. Otherwise, the batters are just going to leave you on length, and that's what happened. So they bowled far too short. They didn't build pressure on the Australian batters with dot balls or maidens. Didn't do the basics well with the ball. Didn't execute their plans or skills with the ball. Didn't take wickets at regular intervals. Didn't build pressure with the ball. Going through the motions with the ball in the first innings, it was a bit lackluster from them. The body language was down. They were negative. They were just waiting until Pat Cummins decided to declare the innings. So a bit of declaration bowling was happening as well. So just going through the motions. So they didn't quite get it right in the first innings, the West Indies. They were quite underwhelming, in fact. The second innings, nothing much to gain from them in the second innings. Basically, it was just waiting for Australia to declare again. They managed to take some wickets. They got 2 wickets in the second innings when Australia batted again. But apart from that, they were just waiting for Australia to declare, really. Nothing to gain, as Australia were 315 runs ahead at the start of their second innings, going through the motions again with the ball. The fielding effort was lackluster. They didn't really want to commit themselves in the field. Not much intensity in the field, going through the motions. And when you're out in the field for a very long time, in the first innings, they bowled over 150 overs to Australia's batters in the first innings and going for runs. It can be demoralising, but you've got to show that fight and resilience and just keep coming and just keep, looking to bounce back every ball. And for the West Indies, that's what they need to do going into the second test in Adelaide, is to not give up, not concede defeat. Yes, it is demoralising when you're out there for 150 overs in the field, but you've got to show that fight and intensity. This is test match cricket. It is going to be a test, and you are going to be, out in the field for a very long time. So you need to keep spirits high, and you need to have a positive attitude towards things, and you can't be negative all the time. So with the bowling performance here for the West Indies, that's what happened. They were negative, lackluster. You could see that in the fielding. If you have a look at the fielding, when they were chasing the ball to the boundary, they didn't really commit. You got to commit to every ball and try and save runs. Yes, even though if you're conceding over 500 runs, but you still got to save every one. And we saw that, contrast that to the Australian fielding performance, they saved every run. They were chasing the ball hard, they were diving, sliding, they were committing themselves in the field. Compare that to the West Indies, they weren't doing that. So that's something that the West Indies need to fix up going into the second test in Adelaide. So their bowling in the first innings and second innings was poor across the board. But the one positive with the ball from the West Indies was Asari Joseph. Now, even though he didn't take a wicket, and he went for a lot of runs in the first innings, the second innings as well, but the spell that he bowled to Marnus Labuschagne, short balls at pace, really rattled Marnus Labuschagne. And that's what the West Indies want to see from Joseph. You know, he can bowl good pace, he can rattle batters. We saw that when he rattled Labuschagne. Labuschagne was hopping around, jumping everywhere around the crease. He wasn't looking comfortable. And then Marnus was able to get through that initial burst and spell from Joseph and score a wonderful century. And obviously scored his second century for the match. So for the West Indies, for Joseph going into the second test in Adelaide, if he can show that aggressive approach and positive approach with the ball, bounce people, bounce batters and bowl short balls, then that would definitely get the team up. And we saw when he bowled those short balls to Labuschagne, the team were up. Everyone was, the body language was up. You could hear the West Indian players encouraging each other, saying, let's go again. So if they can do that in the second test, I think that will be good from the West Indian point of view. So I think he was the positive in the second innings. I don't think he bowled well in the first innings, but in the second innings, that spell to Labuschagne was pretty good. So overall, it was a poor bowling performance from the West Indies. Overall, it was a good effort from the West Indies to show some fight and resistance in this first test against Australia. Let's preview the second test of the series between Australia and the West Indies from the Adelaide Oval. Talk about the potential 11s for both teams and who's going to win this second test. Let's have a look at the test stats between Australia and the West Indies at the Adelaide Oval. The first test match between Australia and the West Indies here in Adelaide was back in 1930. They've played 14 matches here at the Adelaide Oval. 4 of them have been draws, and Australia have won 5, and the West Indies have won 5 test matches apiece. Let's talk about the potential 11 for the second test for Australia, and I think Australia will make one change to their 11 for the second test in Adelaide. Pat Cummins is in doubt with a quad injury he sustained in the first test. Didn't bowl in the second innings. It's a quick turnaround between the first test and the second test. Australia have named Lance Morris and Michael Neser in the squad for the second test in Adelaide to come in as cover, potentially to replace Cummins if the selectors decide to go down that route. But I think Australia will make one change. I think Pat Cummins, there's no need to risk him. There's no need to aggravate the injury even further. Australia have got bigger fish to fry after this series against the West Indies. South Africa coming out to Australia for the next series this summer. Also, what's happening next year with the Tour of India, potential WTC final, and the Ashes. I don't think there's any need for Pat Cummins to play in this second test. He'll be trying everything he can to play this second test, of course, because you don't want to miss out a test for Australia because, you don't want to miss out. But when it comes down to fitness and priorities, I think the Australian selectors will think about the longer-term picture. So if Cummins is ruled out, I think Scott Boland is the obvious choice to come in and replace Pat Cummins. So Australia's potential 11 for the second test could be Warner, Khawaja, Labuschagne, Smith, Head, Green, Carey, Cummins or Boland, Stark, Lyon and Hazelwood. Let's have a look at the West Indies' potential 11 for the second test in Adelaide. Now, the West Indies will make 2 changes, I think, to their 11 for the second test at the Adelaide Oval. Now, they've got a few injury concerns. Kruma Bonner, he was out with concussion in the first test match. Shamar Brooks came in as a concussion sub to replace him. Kemar Roach has injured his thigh, got a bit of a thigh injury there. Kyle Mayers has got a bit of an injured shoulder. So the West Indies are struggling to get an 11 ready for the second test in Adelaide. They had to call reinforcements. Uncapped paceman Marino Minley, who hasn't played a test match yet for the West Indies. He's been flown out as cover, potentially, for Kemar Roach and could make his debut in Adelaide. That's what we're hearing from many people heading into this second test about the potential 11 for the West Indies. But they've got some injury concerns. I think they'll make 2 changes to the side. I think Kruma Bonner I think he could be in doubt for the second test. With concussion, you will often get delayed symptoms and delayed concussion. Now, when he got hit by Cameron Green in the first test on the back of the helmet, he was still out there batting and he got delayed concussion. So it's a quick turnaround between the first test and the second test, Perth and Adelaide. I don't think he'll play because with concussion, it takes a very long time to get over it. So I think he'll be ruled out, and I think Shamar Brooks will replace him in the side. He came in the first test, Brooks, as a concussion sub. I think he'll keep his spot. Kemar Roach is in doubt with that thigh injury. Now, many people are saying that Marino Minley could come in and make his debut in place of Kemar Roach. But will the West Indies risk playing a debutant in a test match that is so important in terms of trying to avoid a 2-0 series defeat? They may not. But they've got Anderson Phillip in the squad, so I think he'll come in and probably replace Kemar Roach. He has played Test cricket before. Kyle Mayers is the third injury concern. I think he'll stay in the team. With Kyle Mayers, the injury concern is his shoulder. The West Indies have said he can't bowl for the rest of the series, but he did bat in Perth, and he did look okay. Depends on a fitness test with Mayers, or whether or not the West Indies want to risk it or not. But I think he'll still be in the 11. So I think they'll only make 2 changes to their side. I think Brooks to come in for Bonner, and Phillip to come in for Roach. So the West Indies' potential 11 for the second test here in Adelaide could be Braithwaite, Chanderpaul, Bonner or Brooks, Blackwood, Mayers, Holder, De Silva, Chase, Joseph, Roach or Phillip, and Seals. That could be the potential 11 for the West Indies in this second test here in Adelaide. Who's going to win this second test at the Adelaide Oval? Well, day-night test here in Adelaide. Australia haven't lost a day-night test in Adelaide, or haven't lost a day-night test in general since the first one in 2015-16, which was against New Zealand here in Adelaide. Australia have won 10 out of 10 day-night tests. Compare that to the West Indies' record in day-night tests. Since 2016 to 2018, the West Indies have only played 3 day-night tests, and they've lost all 3 of them. The first day-night test the West Indies played ever was against Pakistan in 2016, and the last day-night test came 4 years ago in 2018 against Sri Lanka. So for the West Indies, that's not good reading when you look at it. They've lost 3 day-night tests that they've played from 2016 to 2018. Now, in the lead-up to this tour and series against Australia, the West Indies played a day-night first-class match against the Prime Minister's 11 in Canberra at Manuka Oval to get ready and prepare for this day-night test in Adelaide, which was good for the West Indies to get used to playing day-night tests under lights with the pink ball. But looking at Australia's record, I think the West Indies, it will be a bit of a challenge for them to try and win this test here in Adelaide. Given that they haven't won a day-night test, Australia have won 10 of them. But for the West Indies, they've got very fond memories of playing here at the Adelaide Oval. Obviously, the West Indies played that memorable test match here in 1992-93, where they won by 1 run. So the West Indies can draw inspiration from what happened in 92-93 here in Adelaide, where the team won by a run. But day-night tests, different conditions that they played in Canberra compared to Adelaide, when they played that Prime Minister's 11 match recently in that tour match before the series started. So I think Australia should win this second test. They've got the momentum after the first test, Australia. They played well in the first test. They play well here in Adelaide. The West Indies are up against it because it's a day-night test. They haven't played much of them. So for the West Indies, it's going to be a challenge for them. But if the West Indies can show the fight and resistance and resilience that we saw in Perth, and if they can try and succumb the pressure from the Australian bowlers and batters, then they could be a good chance of doing something in this second test. But with all the numbers and the stats, I think Australia should win this second test in Adelaide and probably win the series 2-0. What can we expect from both teams heading into the second test at the Adelaide Oval? Australia will be looking to keep on improving their batting and bowling heading into Adelaide. The West Indies will be looking to build off this test heading into Adelaide. They'll be looking to build on the fight and resistance they showed in Perth to Adelaide and looking at ways to improve with both bat and ball. It was the perfect start to the Test summer for Australia, winning by 164 runs in the first Test against the West Indies. Brilliant batting performances from Marnus Labuschagne and Steve Smith. Also brilliant bowling performances from Nathan Lyon, who took 6 wickets in the second innings. Australia have retained the Sir Frank Worrell Trophy and will be looking to wrap up the series 2-0 in Adelaide for the day-night test. The West Indies showed some great resistance and fight in this first test, and that should boost their confidence heading into Adelaide. Hopefully they can build on this, not only for the second test, but beyond this tour to Australia. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode. Be sure to subscribe and click the bell to get the latest episodes of the podcast, and like and share our Facebook page, and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Until next time, keep safe, and bye for now.